Have you ever had that sinking feeling? When you're just staring at this absolute mountain of material you have to learn and you have zero time to do it?
Oh, yeah, the classic panic.
Right. I mean, it's awful. But today on this deep dive, we're looking at an incredible story about an MIT graduate student who faced exactly that. They were up against one of the most brutal hurdles out there, which is a doctoral qualifying exam.
Right, and just to give some context, if you fail that exam, you're usually asked to leave the program. It's totally make or break.
Exactly. So normally people spend months preparing. But this student got hit with a huge chunk of the exam on a topic they were completely unfamiliar with. I mean, they hadn't taken the prerequisite classes. They hadn't done the reading all semester. They're basically starting from zero.
Which, honestly, under normal circumstances, that is an unmitigated academic disaster.
Yeah.
Because when you're dealing with advanced graduate-level concepts, you can't just, skim a Wikipedia page and hope to survive an oral defense with an MIT professor. The cognitive load alone usually just leads to complete paralysis.
Right. But, and this is the wild part, this student didn't panic. And they didn't lock themselves in a library for a whole semester either. They mastered the entire field in just 48 hours.
Wait, 48 hours?
48 hours. They took the exam and they passed. But, okay, the craziest part isn't just that they passed a multiple choice test. They actually sat down with their thesis advisor, who was a lifelong subject matter expert, and had this deep, dynamic, intellectual debate without getting destroyed.
See, that is the fascinating part, because surviving a multiple choice test, that just relies on short-term recognition, right?
Yeah.
But holding your own in a fluid, high-stakes debate, that requires genuine structural comprehension. You have to really understand how all these complex concepts interact with each other under pressure.
Exactly. And so our mission for today's deep dive is to extract the exact three-step framework this student used so that you, the listener, can replicate it. We're going to unpack the specific prompts, the cognitive science behind it, and the tool they used.
Yeah, and to understand how this 48-hour sprint even worked, we have to look at the engine driving it. So they used a tool called Google's NotebookLM.
Right.
You can think of it as like a highly advanced private tutor, but it has a very specific constraint. You know how standard AI chatbots just scrape the entire open internet to give you an answer?
Oh, yeah. And sometimes they give you garbage.
Exactly. But NotebookLM allows you to upload a massive but restricted batch of sources. I think it's up to 50 comprehensive documents, and it only uses those specific documents to answer your questions.
I really want to focus on that constraint, actually, because I feel like that's the entire foundation of why this works.
Oh, absolutely.
Like when you ask a generic AI or really complex question, it just wants to please you. So it pulls from everywhere. Maybe it grabs a peer-reviewed journal, but then maybe it pulls from some random Reddit thread.
Or it just hallucinates an entirely fake paper to make the answer look good.
Right. But this student prevented that by building basically a walled garden. They uploaded 6 canonical textbooks, 15 crucial research papers, and full transcripts of the department's lectures.
It's the principle of highly curated input, quality over quantity.
Like downloading Kung Fu in the Matrix.
Well, kind of, but instead of the open internet, you're just feeding the AI a hyper-specific Ivy League diet. If you put guardrails on a bowling alley, the ball literally can't go in the gutter. By restricting the AI's diet to those 6 textbooks and 15 papers, the student created a closed-loop system.
Okay, I see.
So the AI becomes this localized expert that anchors every single claim directly in the text you provided. You aren't asking the internet, you're interrogating your specific syllabus.
Okay, so the material is loaded in. The AI has processed tens of thousands of pages. And I gotta say, this is the point where I've historically made a massive mistake.
Oh, what do you usually do?
Well, I've uploaded huge documents and just typed, hey, give me a comprehensive summary of this. And I read the summary and it sounds brilliant and I nod along and I literally feel like a genius.
Right.
But then like an hour later, I realized I retained absolutely nothing. I had this total illusion of competence.
Oh, the illusion of competence is so dangerous because the summary is just a passive transfer of information. It gives you the destination without forcing your brain to actually walk the path to get there.
Yeah.
But the MIT student bypassed that trap completely with their very first move. They didn't ask for a summary. They prompted the AI with a really specific question. They asked, what are the 5 fundamental mental models shared by every expert in this field?
Wow. So instead of asking for facts, they ask for the blueprint.
Exactly. And cognitively, that is just brilliant. Novices usually try to learn a new subject by memorizing individual bricks.
Like making flashcards for vocabulary.
Exactly. Isolated dates, formulas, things like that. But experts don't view their field as a pile of bricks. They see a whole building. They use mental models, which are underlying structural frameworks, to organize all that information.
That makes a lot of sense.
Like if we take economics as a hypothetical example, a novice is going to try to memorize what loss aversion means, but an expert understands the broader mental model of prospect theory, which explains how human beings evaluate risk and reward universally.
So by asking for the mental models right out of the gate, you completely skip that phase where you're blindly collecting facts. You get the scaffolding first.
Yep. Which gives all those subsequent details a specific place to live in your brain. You are instantly adopting this panoramic perspective that usually takes, well, an entire semester of struggling for a grad student to develop.
Okay, but having the mental models gives you the blueprint, sure. But a blueprint doesn't necessarily tell you where the building might, collapse.
Very true.
Which leads right into the second step of their framework. So the student followed up with another highly targeted prompt. They said, show me the 3 points where experts fundamentally disagree and the best argument for each side.
I love this one. This is how you map the boundaries of human knowledge in a specific domain. Because true mastery isn't just knowing the consensus, right? It's understanding where that consensus actually falls apart.
Yeah, because when you read a textbook, it presents everything in settled fact. It gives off this illusion that the science is perfectly complete and figured out.
Exactly. But if you actually go sit in a faculty lounge or you attend an academic conference, all you hear is brilliant people arguing about the gray areas.
Just fighting over the friction point.
Right. And asking the AI to synthesize those fundamental disagreements forces it to highlight those friction points. Like, why do the authors of those 15 research papers disagree with the authors of the 6 textbooks?
I see.
By analyzing the best arguments for competing theories, you develop a 3-dimensional map of the topic. You see the paved roads, but you also see exactly where the wilderness begins.
Which prevents you from looking stupid in a debate, basically.
Exactly, because you already know where the open controversies are.
Okay, I'm tracking with this, but I'm looking at it from the perspective of the exam clock ticking down. We have our mental models, we have our map of the controversies, and it probably took the AI, 45 seconds to generate those responses?
Probably.
But reading those responses still leaves us with my earlier problem, that illusion of competence. Like, we haven't actually cemented this knowledge into our own neural pathways yet.
And that is the crucial pivot. The first 2 prompts were just setting the stage. That was data structuring, the actual learning, the biological process of physically altering your brain to retain complex information. That all happens in step 3.
Okay.
The student moved from passive reading to intense active friction.
The crucible. They initiated the stress test. So the third prompt they fed the system was, generate 10 questions that would expose if someone truly understands this topic in depth versus someone who just memorized facts.
They literally asked the AI to become an adversarial examiner.
Yeah, that AI generates these 10 brutal high-level questions. And then the students spent 6 grueling hours attempting to answer them. And they didn't just, guess in their head. They sat down, drafted complex arguments, wrestled with the interconnected concepts, and used the original source documents to try and solve the problems.
The real power here lies in the feedback loop. When the student inevitably struggled, or maybe provided a shallow answer, they submitted it back to NotebookLM. But they didn't just ask, hey, what's the correct answer?
Right, that would be too easy.
The critical phrase they used was, explain why this is wrong and what concept I am missing.
What concept am I missing?
Wow.
You're asking the machine to diagnose your specific intellectual blind spot.
Exactly. And educational research consistently highlights that individualized, immediate feedback is the single most powerful accelerator of learning.
Really? The single most powerful?
Yeah. Historically, the only way to get that was to hire a world-class private tutor to sit right over your shoulder, watch you fail, and immediately explain the gap in your logic. But this student engineered a tireless, non-judgmental tutor that was perfectly happy to spend hours at 2 a.m. relentlessly explaining a flawed premise until they finally grasped it.
So we've got the 3 steps. Curate the email system, ask for the models and disagreements to build the structure, and then initiate a brutal feedback loop. But I want to push back on the timeline a bit here.
Okay, go for it.
48 hours is a dangerously tight window. I mean, it still sounds like a massive cram session. And look, I have pulled all-nighters before an exam, completely hyped up on energy drinks, highlighting a textbook until my eyes practically bled.
Oh, we've all been there.
And it never works. The knowledge literally evaporates the moment I walk out of the testing center. So how does this specific framework bypass the failure rate of traditional cramming?
Well, it works because it completely abandons the biological dead end of passive reading. It forces the brain to utilize three incredibly potent cognitive mechanisms instead. Let's break down the actual science of why this 48-hour window was effective, starting with active recall.
Okay, so the exact opposite of my yellow highlighter method.
Pretty much. Highlighting and rereading create a psychological trick called recognition. You look at a highlighted sentence and your brain says, oh yeah, I recognize that. And you mistake that feeling of familiarity for actual comprehension.
Yes, that's exactly what happens.
But when you sit down for the exam and stare at a blank page, that familiarity just vanishes. You can't actually retrieve the information. Active recall, on the other hand, forces you to pull the information out of your brain without looking at the source. There's actually a landmark meta-analysis of 242 separate educational studies that measured the effectiveness of practice testing, which is essentially what that 10-question stress test is. And the researchers found an enormous effect size of 0.74.
Okay, wait, let's translate that number for a second, because 0.74, what does that actually look like in the real world?
Good question. So in research terms, an effect size measures how much of a difference an intervention makes compared to a control group. A 0.74 is considered a massive shift.
Wow.
It means that if you take two groups of people and one group uses rereading while the other uses active practice testing, the group using active recall will reliably and dramatically outperform the other. It physically strengthens the neural pathways associated with retrieval.
Meaning the information isn't just stored somewhere, it's actually accessible on demand.
Exactly.
Okay, so the 10 questions force the active recall. But what about when they fail a question? How? Is that what concept am I missing prompt tie into the cognitive science?
That triggers the second mechanism. Elaborative interrogation. This is the process of asking why and forcing yourself to explain a concept in your own words. It actually shares a lot of DNA with the Feynman technique.
Oh, named after the physicist Richard Feynman.
Yep. His whole philosophy was that if you cannot explain something simply without relying on dense jargon, you don't actually understand it.
Because the jargon just acts as a crutch, right? Like
Yeah.
you use a fancy word to gloss over the fact that you don't actually know how the mechanism works.
Exactly. So when the student asked the AI what concept they were missing, the AI explained it. But the student then had to take that explanation and weave it back into their next attempt at answering the question.
Oh, I see.
They had to articulate the newly learned concept in their own words. And when you do that, you physically hit a wall where your logic breaks down. Identifying that exact point of breakdown and consciously bridging the gap is what encodes the information deeply into the cortex.
I mean, that sounds incredibly mentally taxing. 6 hours of hitting the wall, finding the gap, active recall. Your brain must physically consume massive amounts of energy doing that.
Oh, definitely.
Which brings up the exhaustion factor.
Yeah.
How did they not just burn out and hit diminishing returns after, like, hour 3?
Well, they avoided burnout by leveraging the third scientific principle, spaced practice and consolidation. Normally, we think of spaced practice as, studying for an hour a day over a month. But you can actually microdose spaced practice within a 48-hour window.
How? By taking actual breaks. And I don't mean just switching tabs to check social media, but physically disengaging from the cognitive load.
Precisely. You have to let the neuromodulators in your brain reset. The intense frustration of failing those questions releases chemicals that mark specific neural circuits for strengthening.
Yeah.
But the actual strengthening, the physical rewiring of your brain does not happen while you are studying. It happens during rest. And predominantly it happens during sleep.
Wow. So pulling an all-nighter actually sabotages the entire framework. You're putting in the effort to mark the circuits, but you are denying your brain the biological process required to actually save the data.
Exactly. Sleep is when the hippocampus transfers the short-term learning into the neocortex for long-term storage. By engaging in a brutal 6-hour crucible and then sleeping deeply, the student allowed their brain to synthesize and solidify everything. The sleep was just as critical to passing the exam as the 15 research papers.
That is fascinating. Okay, so let's bring this out of the theoretical and put it into practice for the listener. How can you actually take this MIT student's playbook and apply it to whatever mountain of information you're staring at? First off, you need a system to manage that intense cognitive load, right? You can't just sit down and do a 6-hour active recall session straight through.
No, absolutely not. The friction of just starting a 6-hour session will cause you to procrastinate indefinitely. You have to break the crucible down into manageable units. The Pomodoro technique is highly effective here.
Right, so setting a timer for, say, 25 to 50 minutes of intense, unbroken focus, followed by a mandatory 5 to 10-minute break.
Yes, and during that focus block, you are purely engaged in active recall and an elaborative interrogation with the AI. When the timer goes off, you step away. You stare at a wall, get a glass of water, let your visual cortex relax. This prevents the acute mental fatigue that leads to sloppy thinking.
Another massive point for you to keep in mind is that the AI is really only as good as the director behind the keyboard. If you ask for the 5 mental models and the AI spits out something that feels incredibly basic or superficial, you have to push back.
You really do. You have to actively refine your prompts based on the complexity of your specific field. If the answers are too generic, command the AI to go deeper. Tell it, hey, these models are too fundamental. Give me the advanced structural models that separate a graduate-level understanding from an undergraduate understanding, and cite the specific chapters in the uploaded textbooks.
Yeah, you're managing an incredibly smart but highly literal assistant. You have to demand the depths you require. Okay, let's fast forward. You do the work, you curate the textbooks and papers, you build the walled garden, you extract the mental models, you map the disagreements, you suffer through the Pomodoro blocks of the stress test, you ask what concepts you're missing, and you get a full night of sleep.
Sounds like a busy weekend.
Right. And then you absolutely crush your presentation or your exam or your interview. The 48-hour sprint is over. But how do you make sure that knowledge doesn't just fade away a month later?
Well, you have to transfer the conceptual frameworks out of the vacuum of the study session and into the chaotic environment of the real world.
You have to test the structural integrity of what you just built.
Take those mental models and apply them to your actual job. If you just use this framework to rapidly learn, say, a new project management methodology, don't just leave it in your notes. Try to run your next team meeting using one of those core principles.
Or use the Feynman technique with a colleague. Grab someone over coffee and try to explain the fundamental disagreements of the field you just learned.
That is perfect. The friction of the real world and the unpredictable questions a human being will ask you act as the ultimate ongoing stress test. The entire purpose of this methodology is to move away from the passive accumulation of facts and toward the active construction of competence.
Now, I do want to touch on something before we wrap up. Is this cheating? I mean, having an AI basically spoon-feeds you the mental models and disagreements.
It's a great question, but no, it isn't. Because using AI to bypass understanding, like just having it write your essay for you, that is copying, that's cheating. But using it as a tireless sparring partner to develop your own critical thinking, that's exactly what top-tier institutions value. You still have to do the heavy lifting during the stress test.
That makes total sense. So let's do a final recap of the playbook. Step 1, build the brain. Do not rely on the open internet. Gather the highest quality, most difficult source material you can find and feed it into a constrained system like NotebookLM. Step 2, map the terrain. Do not ask for a summary. Ask for the foundational mental models to build your scaffolding, and ask for the points of fundamental disagreement to understand the boundaries of the field.
Perfect.
Step 3, the crucible. Command the AI to generate a rigorous 10-question diagnostic test. Attempt to answer the questions using your sources, and when you fail, ruthlessly interrogate your own blind spots by asking the machine to explain exactly what concept you're missing. Take real breaks and prioritize sleep to lock the circuits in.
It really is a radical shift, you know. It's moving from using technology as a crutch to using technology as a catalyst for neuroplasticity.
Absolutely. So I want to challenge you, the listener, to test this. Think about a subject that's been intimidating you. Maybe it's understanding the new tax code for your small business, or maybe a complex philosophical framework you've always wanted to grasp, or even the technical documentation for a software pivot your company's making.
Whatever it is, gather the best PDFs, the core manuals, the top articles.
Yeah, throw them into a constrained AI and try this 3-step sprint over the coming weekend. Stop trying to memorize the bricks and start asking for the blueprint.
And as you set up that first batch of sources, consider the broader implications of what this technology actually enables.
What do you mean?
Well, If a highly customized AI can help an individual master the structural logic of an incredibly dense Ivy League discipline in a single weekend, what happens to the value of traditional credentialing?
Oh, wow. That's a huge question.
Right. For a century, the system has rewarded those who could sit in a lecture hall for 4 years and passively absorb the most answers. But if the sum total of human knowledge can now be curated, structured, and rigorously stress tested in 48 hours, perhaps the universities and industries of the future won't care about the answers you already know. The ultimate currency will be how rapidly you can interrogate a machine to expose your own ignorance, and how quickly you can close that gap.
Think about that the next time you are staring at a mountain of material. The advantage no longer goes to the person who can read the fastest. It goes to the person who knows exactly which questions to ask.